I had a meeting with Sequoia with my co-founder and CEO at the time. The meeting was going really well. I think the founder was interested. He stopped spinning in his chair and stopped for 5 minutes to listen to what we were saying. I'm not kidding about that, by the way. He was like turning himself in his chair. And at the end, he's like, all right, cool. Well, what valuation are you guys looking for? Sequoia had just invested in Circle. And it was like the laugh of the whole valley. It was the joke of the town.
Yeah.
And my co-founder goes, well, the market's going to decide the ultimate valuation, but, nothing crazy and stupid like the Circle deal.
Whoops.
As we were leaving, I had to remind him that Sequoia was the one that did that deal. He's like, no, no, fuck.
Did they send you a term sheet?
They didn't. None of them replied to our follow-up emails.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is an educational episode. In-depth masterclasses about the concepts essential to building, running, and investing in Silicon Valley-style startups. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll gain insights into the principles that power high-growth disruption, the same way Facebook, Google, and Uber do it. The conversation starts now.
Hey, I'm Chris Sard.
And I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
In today's show, we're going to tell you all the things VCs might say to you and what they really mean if you're reading between the lines. It may not be that flattering, you may not want to hear it, but it's important to know as you go through your fundraising journey. So stay tuned for all that and much more right after the break.
Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's vanta.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off. Welcome back. Now, just before we bust into it, I need to remind you all about the Startup Podcast Pact. If you're enjoying the show, we would love your help in getting it in front of more listeners. The way you can do that is to subscribe to us in your favorite listening app, give us a rating or review, follow us on YouTube, and give us a shout out on LinkedIn or wherever it is that you have your following. It helps us grow the show, helps us get more great guests and keep doing what we're doing. Thanks so much for your help. Now let's get into it.
All right, Yaniv, for this episode, we wanted to borrow a riff on a post that Nilay Moody posted actually about 5 months ago on LinkedIn. And I noted it down, saved it in our scratch pad for us to talk about. He was a YC founder in 2024, and he's the founder of Central. And we'll put a link to the post in the show notes. But he's written a little YC Demo Day survival guide to help you understand what the VCs will say and what they actually mean. So we're going to go read out his version of what he thinks they mean. We'll take some of them in a lighthearted, fun way, but we'll also use the opportunity to take it seriously and tell you what VCs really want, what they're really looking for, and how you can adjust your pitch, how you can adjust your business so that you can get funding. So let's dive right in. The first one of these is what the VC says. This is not aligned with our strategy. What the VC really means is we have no idea what our strategy is, but it's definitely not this. What do you think, Yaniv? Is that what VCs really mean?
I mean, a lot of the time, whatever VCs are saying, what they really mean is we're just not that into you, actually. And yes, sometimes VCs have a strategy, but, I think put it this way, to the extent that VCs have a strategy, my experience is most of them are happy to throw that strategy or that mandate out the window if they see a really good opportunity coming their way, right? They're like, well, we don't normally invest in this, but we're really interested in you.
Yes.
And so, I think, in a sense, saying not aligned with our strategy is one of the variety of ways of saying we're not that into you. Now, it doesn't mean there isn't sometimes a grain of truth. And there are VCs who are more discipline. So I don't want to be as cynical as perhaps this post is, because I think it's like there's always a grain of truth to these things, but also there's more subtlety, right? I know VCs that are really disciplined. They say, we only do mid-market B2B SaaS, and they mean it, and they're really good at it. And I actually have a huge amount of respect for those VCs. But you know what? The thing with those ones is they're not going to take the meeting with you in the first place, because they're going to look at you they're going to look at your pitch deck and they're going to be like, it's not aligned with our strategy. It's not in our mandate. We're not going to waste our time talking to you. I think the little tell here, the flag, is that they took the meeting in the first place, Chris. That is why they don't have any idea what their strategy is, because if they knew what their strategy was and you're not aligned with it, why are they even talking to you? Why are they wasting your time and, more importantly, their own?
And often you'll hear this expressed as our thesis versus our strategy, right? So VCs often use the word thesis.
Strategy is not a very VC word.
No, it's not a VC word. No, I agree with you. So if they're taking the meeting and then they say you're not with our strategy, what that means is one of two things. They don't have a strategy and they're just like, trying to throw spaghetti at the wall. Or more likely what you said, Genev, which is they just don't like you that much. And all of these, we're going to have fun with all these and joke around, but they're all a version of, we don't like it that much. And we want to say what they call the California no, or the Silicon Valley no, which is, we don't want to say no because next week you might blow up and you'll be the next hottest deal. And we want to be able to come back around and say, oh, we loved you. Remember we told you it was just not the right time. But so they give you some other different thing. But if they were really into you, and this is going to be true for a lot of these, they would just say yes. And so yeah, not on our thesis. As you said, many VCs do have a very particular kind of thesis. However, they're just as likely as not to go outside of their thesis for a company they really love, or the partner will put in their own money, or they will forward you to a VC they like that will that it is in their thesis. They will help you much more than just go, oh, sorry, it's not really in our wheelhouse.
I mostly agree. Although I would actually say, Chris, that, saying not aligned with our thesis is actually a no. Unlike some of the other ones we're going to discuss, which are true California no's in the sense that they're not, sort of like, oh, not now. At least not aligned with our thesis it's no. And this is why.
It's no. Nothing stopping them from saying, coming back later, go, well, we really liked you and we're willing to stretch our thesis now that you've hit the front page of, I don't know, Hacker News or something.
Yeah.
So it's still, but it's not, but they're still saying it's not you, it's us.
I know in a sense what we're doing with this, what this post is about and what we're doing with this episode is a bit of a lighthearted mocking of sort of the VC culture, but actually I would kind of do the same thing in their shoes, right? And it's the same thing that happens when you are hiring for a job and you need to reject people. And quite often the reason you reject them is because you just don't think they're that great. And they say, oh, I really want feedback. And then you give them the feedback and you say, really, we just don't think you're that great. And this is why. And then they either start arguing back or they get offended. It's like the incentive structure is not aligned towards actually giving that tough feedback with someone who you have no plan to have a future engagement with. So it's much easier to say the soft, nice thing. Say, it's not you, it's me. Don't worry about it. Let's stay in touch. And so, I think as founders, we also have to take a good hard look at ourselves and say, how receptive are we actually to hard-hitting feedback? And how precious are we sometimes about this stuff?
We're taking this topic entirely too seriously now, but that's okay. Yeah, so many emails I've received from VCs where they're explaining this or that problem, and I'm like, I'm trying to convince them of something, and that's not necessarily a great place to be in. What they're trying to say is like, I just don't believe in it. I don't believe it. I don't believe in you. I don't believe in this. I don't believe in the company or whatever I don't believe in. And so, sorry, but no. All right, the next one here, the VC says, we need to see more traction. And what they really mean is your graphs are as flat as Kansas. I don't see any graphs with the line going up. Line must be going up. Line must be going up. This is, again, this is going to get, we don't want to get repetitive with these, but they're all a version of we just don't believe it yet. And I've had founders come to me and say, look, Chris, this VC said we must have X amount of ARR or we have to have this kind of user base. And, those metrics are, again, just like the thesis, they're usually rules of thumb. They're usually something that they're generally looking for. But if you were like, the former founder of OpenAI, or if you were, had recruited the domain expert in the field and solved some hard tech material science problem, and, they had deep enough pockets to fund it, your traction is not that relevant, and certainly not in the very, very early days when it's about team versus traction. And so just be careful about over-indexing on the brain fart or the false reason they're giving you when it's really just a general, this package is not coming together for us.
Yes. So, but, okay, so I'm going to be the straight guy in this. And like you said, take it more seriously than perhaps it's intended, but I'm okay with that. So
of course you are. Of course you are.
Let's talk about this traction thing, because first of all, the post that we were referencing is talking about the graph being as flat as Kansas. And frankly, if your graph is as flat as Kansas, then you do have a problem, because startups are all about growth. But what I actually think too many VCs mean when they say I need to see more traction is I need to see more revenue. And this is something we've railed against a lot, because, they say, oh, what's your traction? You say, look, here's our user growth and, here are our LOIs, or, here is the retention of our users and our 7-day actives and our engagement. And they're like, yeah, but how much money are you making? And you say, oh, we're not monetizing yet. And they say, well, we need to see more traction. And so it's like, I think traction is often used as a synonym for money, and I don't like that. And we're talking here, of course, at early stages. At some point, your startup could be making a lot of money, right? But at the early stage, we talk about the de-risking. Traction is one of those forms of de-risking, right? It's about saying normally the biggest risk, unless you're in deep tech or doing something really complex, is a lack of product market fit. It's that what you're building is something that nobody wants. And so you want to be showing signs that, yes, this is something that people want. And to me, that's what traction is. Traction is we're getting some signals from the market that this is something that it wants. And if you're getting no signals from the market, your graphs are as flat as Kansas. Well, frankly, maybe you shouldn't be funded, right? Maybe you need to be thinking about what it is that you're building and why it does not seem to be getting that traction.
Look, you're going to force me to take this topic seriously, and I'm going to resent you about this later.
Yeah, that's fine, baby.
I'm going to resent this later. Look, for an early stage startup, as you said, if they're looking for serious revenue, they're just dumb money, kind of walk out or try to convince them if you can. But I think it is actually, to take this seriously, too many first-time founders walk into a VC meeting, an angel meeting, and think that their idea is enough. And they don't have even a team or even the semblance of a product, much less traction.
Yeah.
And so often to many of these founders that reach out to me, my very first comment to them is, you need to ship this freaking thing and you need traction. It is, absent any former startups or exits, any pedigree from whatever, Google, Facebook, Uber, any meaningfully, interesting team with pedigree, any proprietary IP, the only thing you have to signal that you are a credible operator is traction. And so this is, I was joking about it at the beginning, but yes, if you are a first-time founder, you got something serious to prove. And the easiest, clearest, most direct way of proving that is some people using your thing, and that number of people going up and to the right.
Yeah, and I think, you talked about pedigree. It's something we've touched on before, and I think it is relevant here, right? Like, you're asking investors for money, you need to be bringing something to the table. So sure, you might see these stories of people raising pre-product, right? Pre-product meaning pre-traction, nothing's out in market. And again, if they're deep tech, then the traction can sometimes be, hey, we've actually made a discovery, we have IP. But if you just have an idea and that's all, the only way you're going to be raising off that is if you have a strong pedigree, right? Because then in that case, what they are doing is explicitly investing in your pedigree, saying, well, they've done it before, we believe they can do it again. Absent that, you need to show that you've actually built something that is exciting and that you have something to bring to the table other than just, a begging bowl. That's just the reality. And I don't think sugarcoating it helps, because then you get these weird rejections from founders. If you are not blue ribbon pedigree, go out there, figure out a way of showing that early traction before you go out asking for any investment money.
Yeah. And just super quickly on this, we've had many episodes on it. What does pedigree mean? It does not necessarily mean you are the most incredible scientist in the world in this field, because that doesn't necessarily mean you know how to run a business. It does not mean that you've been a professor at something, because that almost certainly means you don't know how to run a business. It does not mean you've had a clever idea. Pedigree means you have demonstrated the ability to build, iterate, and grow something, or been at companies that demonstrate that they've taught a lot of people how to do that. And I'm talking about the school of Google, the school of Facebook, the school of Uber, the school of Amazon, the school of Y Combinator, the school of Stanford. Whether you like it or not, they are on-ramps that are often looked at in Silicon Valley as signals that you know how to build something. And so just be careful. Academic pedigree doesn't necessarily translate to operational pedigree. Operational pedigree in a large corporate doesn't necessarily translate into startup pedigree, on and on and on.
Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, Flow Health, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
The next little fun one here is, please keep us in the loop, which actually means forget that you have my email. In fact, forget that email exists. If you message me again, I will call the Sopranos.
Actually, Jesus Christ, Chris, this is a terrible post. Sorry. I know we're going to give it credit, but actually I disagree with nearly everything it says. Please keep us in the loop means please keep us in the loop. You're right to be a little bit cynical, because what please keep us in the loop means is please keep giving us industry intelligence and optionality in return for nothing, right? It's like, of course, please send me your investor updates. I think they do want to be kept in the loop. The more investor updates you get, the more information you have about what's happening in the market. That's going to help you make future investments as an investor. And it's also going to keep your options open. If suddenly that Kansas, keep going west and you hit the Rockies and you suddenly go up and to the right. You're like, oh, well, maybe I am interested in investing in this, what I thought was a dud. Actually, I'm interested in investing. So please keep us in the loop does not mean never contact me again. It means give me free information with the expectation of nothing in return.
Yes, exactly. Now, the reason for this, Yaniv, and we should possibly do a whole episode about what it means and how to be a VC. As far as I'm concerned, VCs have 3 superpowers that make them really fantastic capital allocators. Maybe 4. The first is information. So this is what keep us in the loop means, right? Do they have insider information on many startups, on what some of the corp dev teams are doing, how the macroeconomic climate is going, and so on? The second is deal flow. They want the best deals to come to them and want to have them on their cap table. The third is network. So network can drive deal flow and information, but more importantly, who can I introduce my founders to maximize their equity growth and their potential for exit? And the last one, which I thought of just at the last second, was judgment. So the ability to evaluate and do diligence on a company and figure out if it's any good pretty quickly. If you have 3 or 2 out of those 4, you're probably doing pretty well as a VC. And if you have all 4, then you're probably a rock star.
Yeah.
The next one is it's not you, it's us, which is sort of another version of, it's not part of our strategy but sometimes this is expressed also as I couldn't get the partners over the line. You haven't hit some of the metrics, all this kind of stuff. This post says what they really mean is it's absolutely, unquestionably, definitively you. But if I tell you it's you, you'll write an expose, it'll go viral on LinkedIn, and my partner will send me to a spa in Novosibirsk, Siberia for 6 months. I would say actually more often than not, in ecosystems outside of the valley, and sometimes inside the valley, it can actually be the VC, because there's a lot of dumb money around. If you're following our advice, you're talking about venture scale outcomes, you're talking about hockey stick curves, you're talking about delaying revenue or not allowing revenue to derail you, you're talking about disruption versus partnership, you're talking about true Silicon Valley principles, and you go to many of the second, third tier markets where there's second, third tier VCs, it is them. It is absolutely them. And their LPs, their thesis, their attitude, their experience is actually getting in the way of them understanding the opportunity you have. But very often they just don't have conviction, and sometimes rightly so.
Yeah, I mean, it's not you, it's us is 90% of the time not true, right? Like, of course, in a sense, it's always them because they're making a decision not to invest in you. That's their choice. There are occasional situations where, for example, it's them in some technical sense. For example, you've got a fund that might have exhausted their capital, right? They're saying, okay, whatever we have left, we're keeping in reserves for follow-ons, and we just don't have any fresh capital to deploy.
Which means they shouldn't be taking the meeting, right?
Possibly. Yep, shit happens, right? They maybe they're taking the meeting, but maybe there were like 2 opportunities they could only afford to invest in one of them. They chose the other one, right? But if they had the money, maybe they would have invested in you too. So there are corner cases, is my point. But in general, what it means is it's us in the sense of we've made the judgment that we don't think you are a good place to park our money. It's a gentle way of letting them down in general.
Yeah. So technically it is always them.
Yeah, it is always them.
They're the ones making it.
Technically, it's always them.
That's right. And then the final one here in the post is we're really excited about your vision, which means, according to this post, your vision is wonderful. It's your current business model that reminds us of a horror movie. Frankly, I may need therapy after seeing your revenue and churn. Again, this one, to take this one a bit more seriously, we've spoken throughout this episode about the idea of the founder with just an idea. Sometimes you might express it as the founder with just a really big vision and no evidence that they know how to execute a tactical reality in the present. And so, founders will not just have an idea, they'll have a really, really big idea. Like, we are going to completely revolutionize driving with flying cars. It's going to be amazing. And if everybody installs our flying car tech, the world will be better because there won't be any pedestrians hit on the road. Well, yeah. And if wishes were horses, we'd all be eating steak, right? It's like, it's just a big idea. It's
Anything horse steak?
That's a Serenity quote, a Firefly quote. It's a great fantasy idea, or rather it's a great fantasy vision, but it's an untenable one, and it's especially untenable for me to believe it because you've demonstrated no prior experience in creating, building, and growing anything. And so I'm just like, that's a very nice wish, but I don't believe you.
Again, I think it's less about, as the post says, your traction or your retention numbers are bad. It's more that your vision is unrealistic and grandiose, right? And I think that, that's what you're saying, and I agree with you. This is a typical sort of relatively naive founder coming in saying, yes, I am going to reinvent social networking. I'm going to reinvent CRMs and so on. And you have this great vision. And Chris, I know you love to talk about cutting things into thin slices. It's fine to have a vision that maybe one day supplants social networking, although I don't think that's a great option, to be honest, for a startup. Again, unless you have a very specific reason why you think you're the right person to do it. But the point is, if all you have is a grand vision, and if your strategy for your startup is to implement that grand vision and, that's it, then it's not compelling, right? It's saying you have a vision and no execution plan, no operational capability, no sense of how hard it's going to be. You're going into this thing blind, right? You are fighting you're bringing a knife to a gunfight, and the outcome is preordained, right? Like, it is actually the naivety that the VC is responding to and saying, I cannot in good faith put my money with someone who has so little idea of the type of battle that they're going into.
All right. That is the end of the list here. Just a bit of fun. Some of these are a little bit silly, and some of them actually can suggest something very serious for you to listen to and pay attention to and adjust your pivot, adjust your strategy. So what about you guys? Do you have any of these that you've heard and you've read between the lines, translated to something else? Let us know in the comments. Spotify actually has comments now. YouTube has comments. We'd love to hear from you. We'll join you down there as well.
All right, Chris. So if folks are listening and saying, okay, that sort of guidance would be really valuable to me as I go through my founder journey. I know that's something that you love to help people with. So how can they get in touch?
Yeah, you can learn more about my advisory work over at chrissaad.com/advisory. I can't help everyone, so in the meantime, subscribe to my newsletter over at chrissaad.com/newsletter. How about you, Yaniv?
Yep, so I'm over on LinkedIn trying to make it a less boring place, as I always say. So I love to get connection requests from TSP listeners. Just send the connection request, let me know you're from TSP, and I would be glad to connect. All right, Chris, that was a fun episode. Thanks for bringing that one up.
All right, catch you in the next one, mate. Bye-bye.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.